So if you've ever seen me discuss the topic of free will in previous videos, you'll know that I actually believe in free will. And to me, the notion of free will is actually quite intuitive. But to me, the intricacies surrounding free will only really become apparent when you examine the nature of the universe as a multifaceted phenomenon and properly incorporate the notion of sentience and consciousness into your picture of the universe. In other words, once you begin to grasp the complexity of the psyche itself and emergence and consciousness, you begin to see that free will is kind of a natural consequence of being a sentient organism. And it actually becomes a rather intuitive fact. And most people, let's say the average person, actually already knows this. Most people intuitively sense their own free will. They intuitively believe that free will exists. It's only when you decontextualize things and try to analytically examine the idea of free will, just kind of using rationality in our own minds, that this notion of free will not existing emerges. But should we trust our intuitions in this case or trust our rationality? I think a lot of mainstream philosophical discourses, the likes of which you see in Sam Harris, Sabina Hossenfelder, and Robert Sapolsky, has really made the idea that you don't have free will increasingly popular and accepted. And so a lot of people, as a consequence of this, are convinced that free will doesn't really exist. And I'm here to tell you that, as somebody who studies psychology, this is actually really bad. Not believing in free will is immeasurably bad for your health, both mental and physical. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, I don't believe in free will and I'm perfectly fine. And that's good. That's awesome. I'm really happy for you. Here, have a Pop-Tart. But the majority of people, on average, are negatively impacted by this belief. And a lot of studies have shown that having a sense that you have free will, having a sense that you can control your fate, that you are the captain of your own destiny, produces much better outcomes for people's mental health and their physical health, as well as their overall well-being. Because if you feel like you aren't free to alter your own fate, you will naturally become resigned to fate. And that's not particularly helpful if you're beset by various challenges. There's a lot of contexts in which this applies. Researchers sometimes refer to this as self-determination theory, which basically states that feeling like an autonomous individual who's capable of making your own decisions is better for your behavioral regulation. This is really important in healthcare. Because, for example, the negative effects of diseases like type 2 diabetes or obesity or cardiovascular problems can be reduced if a person is able to regulate their behaviors. But getting a person to motivate themselves to do something is actually really hard. And there are many people who absolutely hate getting told to do anything. Just look at how many people threw a fit when they were told to wear masks during COVID. And again, that's kind of natural. There's an archetypal predisposition to want to not listen to authority figures. And so the best way for a person to make those kind of changes in their lives is if they feel internally motivated to do so, rather than feeling like something external is forcing them to do it. Because again, it's a natural tendency to want to push back against something that's trying to force you to act a certain way. And so this is why having a sense of free will, of your own free agency, is really important. So if you have diabetes, for example, you need to regulate your consumption of sugar, but that might be really hard if in the past you used to eat a lot of sugar, and so your brain is naturally hardwired to crave sugar, and even your gut bacteria might start producing signals that encourage you and give you that feeling of craving, like you really need sugar badly. So a person who's in that situation might just feel resigned to fate, that there's nothing they can do because their brain is just organized in a certain way and their body is organized in a certain way, and that makes them crave sugar, and they can't really control their cravings. The cravings just kind of naturally rise up as a consequence of their past decisions. They're basically just under the control of these biochemical influences in their body. But alternatively, a person like this can believe that they are capable of altering destiny. That yes, maybe my brain and my body is predisposed to want to crave sugar, but I can still control my cravings, or I can choose not to act on my cravings. And so they might believe that even though this is an enormous challenge, that it's possible to overcome it. Can you guess which attitude is better for your health? Well, you don't have to guess because this has been extensively researched. For example, a meta-analysis conducted in 2012 looked at 184 different studies, which examined healthcare systems that either promoted a person's sense of free will or did not promote a person's sense of free will. And basically they found that when you promote a person's sense of their own agency, you make them much more competent and much more capable of sticking to their healthcare recommendations, such as eating healthy or not smoking. This in turn meant that people with a greater sense of free will experience better mental health and better physical well-being. Now, this is not to say that the only way a person can get better is if they feel internally motivated to do so. Sometimes, in very severe health situations, a person really needs kind of a forceful push to get them going. Sometimes a serious intervention is what's necessary. But by and large, if you can promote that sense of free will in a patient, it's much better for everyone, the patient and the healthcare providers. Because for the patient, it means that they can rely on themselves, and that feeling of autonomy is actually very empowering. And for the healthcare system, it ultimately just reduces strain because For example, a lot of people don't feel motivated to take their own medicine, but that just means that they'll be in and out of the hospital more frequently. So if you can motivate a person to have a sense of autonomy and motivate them to take their medicine, it means that there'll be less hospital visits, a person will stick to their medication, and it ultimately reduces strain on the healthcare system. You might start to notice that I've actually have a sore throat, but hopefully it makes my voice sound better. And I think the biggest takeaway from this paper comes from something the author said, which is, the perception of being able to achieve these difficult to change health behaviors is imperative for making the change. And so this highlights the connection in believing in possibilities, no matter how remote they may seem, and actually manifesting these possibilities. You have to believe it's possible for it to occur at all. And this is actually part of the way in which I conceptualize free will. You envision something which isn't real, and then you make it real by pursuing it. But I'll get more into that later down the line. One area where it seems very intuitive, where having a sense of free will is really important, is addiction. Similarly to that sugar example I mentioned earlier, if you're addicted to a drug, it's like your brain is in a state where it just craves that drug, and it's very difficult to control that sense of craving. Whether it's nicotine, opioids, alcohol, or stimulants, if you've been taking these drugs for a long time, your brain will have been rewired to want these drugs and to expect regular encounters with these addictive compounds. And so your brain and your body will make you feel awful whenever these chemicals are depleted. And it's very often the desire to escape from those negative emotions that causes a person to just be stuck in this vicious cycle of addiction. And so it can really feel like the substance is in control of the person and that they're powerless to do anything about it. But if you supply an addict with the belief that it is possible to overcome their addiction, that they actually have the free will needed to become clean, they will be more likely to overcome it. And again, a lot of research has shown this to be the case. I found one review that summarized previous research on this, and here are some of the things which the author said. Disbelief in free will seems to make people less likely to think for themselves, as reflected in greater conformity to other people's judgments, and lesser willingness to articulate personal lessons from their own guilty misbehaviors. In this analysis, the belief that addiction destroys free will makes it more difficult for people to control their usage or to quit. Now, the authors also say something which I've been trying to convey through my videos about free will, which is, self-control is an important form of what people understand as free will, and the capacity for self-control is real but limited, thus neither complete nor completely lacking. The traditional notion of willpower may be useful here, especially if one understands willpower as a kind of psychological energy that fluctuates as people use it up and then recharge it. Free will is a partial, sometime thing. And this is perfectly consistent with my view of free will, which is free will isn't an absolute matter. It's not all or nothing. You can have more or less of it. It's fundamentally quantitative. And just because there are factors which may limit your free will or predispose you to a certain destiny, nothing is set in stone. And knowing that fact, understanding that fact is really crucial. Free will is not an all or nothing matter. And they go on to say something which I think captures a lot of the complexities involved with the matter of free will. There is certainly room to incorporate biological and genetic vulnerabilities in such a model. People may vary as to the reward power of drugs and alcohol. Some people get more pleasure than others from them. Social factors and personal experiences may also contribute to individual differences in such propensities. Thus, some people may end up with stronger cravings than others. Still, some freedom remains. The wine does not pour itself into a glass and thence down the alcoholic's throat. The person thus makes a choice between competing impulses, indulging pleasure now versus abstaining for the sake of non-specific but substantial delayed gains. Choosing the path of virtuous abstention depends on willpower, however. When willpower has been depleted, such as by other acts of self-control, or even by decision-making in any context, their likelihood of choosing the immediate pleasure increases. So this raises a really interesting question. Is free will something that doesn't exist, but it's actually just good to believe in it? It's like a useful fiction? In my opinion, the answer is actually no. I believe that it's good to believe in free will because it actually exists. It's not merely a helpful yet fictional idea. It's both simultaneously helpful to believe in it, and you should believe in it because it really exists. But now I'm going to say something which at first might seem contradictory to what I've been claiming so far. And that's the fact that believing in your own free will can actually be very bad in a very specific way, which is that it has the potential to be very bad for everyone else around you and for society more broadly. Because remember how I said that the idea of free will is something we intuitively know? It's only when you start to engage in analytical philosophy that the notion that you might not have free will emerges. Well, someone who has a very strong sense of their own free will can use that free will to exert their power over other people, over people who don't have that sense of free will or who lack free will in general. And by doing so, they can exert a profound influence influence over their environments. People who have a lot of power and influence tend to be people who are pretty sure of their own free will, and they often use this to advantage themselves at the expense of other people. Usually people who are less convinced of their own free will, or they just have less free will. This is clearly the case in the so-called great men of history, like Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan, and Napoleon. I love how I always bring up those three. But these men, I argue, were men who possessed an abundance of free will. These were men who were totally convinced of their free will and used it a lot. As a result, they were immensely destructive and caused significant misery to thousands of people, millions of people in some cases, during the periods in which they lived. Now, if you think about it, all of this was actually good for these individual men because they became immensely rich, they had plenty of sexual opportunities, and they became very famous. We still speak about them today in pretentious intellectual YouTube videos. But it was bad for many other people who had to endure their cruel ambitions. The takeaway here is that believing in free will is usually good for you at the individual level, but it might not necessarily be the case at the collective level. Although you can envision a way in which a person who has a lot of free will does it to benefit the collective, but such cases are relatively rare because people tend to be self-serving. But if you think about it, the real danger in not believing in free will is that you basically surrender your will to people who are more ambitious and have more free will than you do. And so there's a much greater risk of you being pretty much enslaved by such people and controlled by their wills. People who don't believe in free will are more vulnerable to being controlled by the wills of others. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, I don't believe in free will and I'm totally independent. And that's good. That's really good. I'm really happy for you. Here, have another Pop-Tart. But also I would argue that even if you may consciously not believe in free will, there's a good chance that unconsciously or behaviorally you do pretty much express your free will, and so you're still able to reap the benefits of free will even though your conscious analytical mind might not believe in it. And so that might explain your relative independence even if you claim to be somebody who doesn't believe in free will. But like I said, if you give up on your sense of free will, it leaves you vulnerable to being controlled by the wills of others. I believe situations like Nazi Germany occur when everybody surrenders their free will to some cruel, ambitious leader, partly so that they can let someone else steer their destiny. And this actually reduces the burden of having self-agency. But look at what the consequences are. You have situations where soldiers are being told to commit acts of genocide, even if they don't want to, but they have no ability to say no. And that's what could potentially happen when you have a situation where lots of people collectively lose their sense of free will. And so that's why I'm speaking out against this kind of spread of the idea of not having free will. I believe it's actually societally very dangerous. So these are the reasons why you should believe in free will. But what I'm going to be doing in future videos moving forward is I'm going to actually break down my arguments for the existence of free will. And I hope that my arguments will be convincing and that you'll also see or come to realize why the idea of free will is actually rather obvious and why you should believe in it. And I'm also going to show why a lot of the arguments against free will are based on faulty assumptions, or the assumptions that you start with don't actually imply the conclusion of not having free will. And having explored free will in just my own head and my own philosophical ponderings, I've realized a lot of unintuitive facts about free will. Yes, we do have this intuitive sense of our own free will, but if you actually break it down, there's a lot of things that are not intuitive, that are counterintuitive, that I want to explain and explore, because I rarely see people discuss these things. So for example, like the idea that free will is quantitative is not something that I see a lot, or the idea that in reality you might have more than one free will. So what this video is the start of a chain of videos, and I swear to God before me that this is all I'm going to be focusing on for the next few videos. I know I make a lot of promises on the channel of like series and then I just never finish them, but this is going to be the thing that I focus on. I've already written a whole bunch of scripts for this, and I'm probably going to record the next video soon. So hopefully that's all I'm going to be focused on, and I think I'll be able to manage it because right now I'm running out of ideas for videos, and this idea alone is worth like 10 videos, and I think it's really important and really vital. So yeah, I'm probably not going to be focusing on anything else video-wise until I've proven that free will exists. So to do so, I'll be constructing the axioms upon which I believe the idea of free will is based, and then hopefully if you agree with the axioms, and I'm going to reason for the axioms, I'm going to show that they're reasonable to assume, you'll agree with the conclusion that follows, and the conclusion will be that free will exists. But it's going to be a long process because we need to define things, and we need to set up the axioms, I need to clarify things that people often don't understand or don't automatically assume, but it'll be fun, I hope. So in my next video, I'm going to be comprehensively defining free will. This is an important starting point. It might seem unnecessary at the start, but it's good to break down what actually we mean by free will, because there's always the possibility that we're defining free will in an arbitrary way and then either proving or disproving that it exists. I want to come up with a definition of free will which makes a lot of sense, which captures a lot of the intricacies of free will, and which people generally agree makes sense as a definition of free will. And going forward, this will hopefully help us stay on the same page. But yeah, anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good day. day, and may good luck always come your way. Oh, and also, if you want a Pop-Tart, you can have this one.